During a group interview for mid-career hires, the interviewer suddenly looked at me and said,
"Our company only hires top-tier US college graduates. And we don't want old geezers who are thinking about changing jobs now either. If you didn't graduate from Harvard University, Stanford University, or Yale University, or if you're one of those low IQ geezers over there, leave now."
At that time, there were about 12 of us in the room for the group interview, including myself. This was the final interview, after passing the document screening, first interview, and second interview. To think that academic background would be questioned at this point. I applied hoping to switch to a big company, but this unreasonable interview disgusted me. Two men in their late 20s sitting next to me seemed to feel the same way. They stood up straight and said something astonishing. This caused the interview to turn into a big commotion. My name is George Clooney, and I am 60 years old. I have worked at an advertising agency and have won several awards. I have also worked on commercials for well-known beverage companies, so many people have probably seen my work. As a result of being completely dedicated to my work while staying single, I suddenly found myself at 60 years old. I could have continued working as a contract employee, but I decided to retire exactly at the retirement age from the advertising company I had been working for. As a result of doing this job for so long, I had developed a certain way of doing things and style, and I often received requests by name with expectations for that. However, upon retirement, I wanted to challenge myself with a different style. So, I decided to take a bold step and switch to a big company that had previously tried to recruit me. When I called the contact number on the business card I had received before, they gladly accepted me. The company had extended retirement to 65 and even had employment extensions up to 70. I had been scouted by them many times before, and they said I could be hired immediately, but since many years had passed since the last time they scouted me, I decided to participate in the group interview. I wanted to go back to the basics, have my skills objectively evaluated, and be sure that this was the right move. It's an industry where skill and sense matter more than physical labor. I still wanted to work and was confident that my experience and knowledge could make significant contributions. Fortunately, my name still held weight in the industry, and despite my age, the interviews progressed smoothly. It happened during the final interview. In the room were 12 candidates who had passed the previous interviews, 10 young people in their 20s, one man in his 40s, and me, a 60-year-old. We had been waiting for over 15 minutes. However, the interviewer did not show up on time. Considering how important this interview was for our futures, we were all honestly frustrated with the interviewer for not even being punctual. Finally, 30 minutes late, the interviewer walked in but didn't apologize for being late. Instead, he looked around the room arrogantly. After scrutinizing our faces, he snorted.
"Our company only hires top-tier US college graduates,"
he declared. Even for a high-pressure interview, this was too much right from the start. We frowned. I had a bad feeling, and it quickly became a reality. The interviewer suddenly looked at me and said,
"And we don't need old geezers thinking about changing jobs now, regardless of their poor achievement. Anyone who graduated from third-rate universities other than Harvard University, Stanford University, or Yale University. And that low IQ geezer over there, leave now."
I was stunned by his words, which were unbecoming of a final interview at a big company. I could hear a gasp of astonishment from the man next to me. In the now silent room, only the interviewer's mocking voice echoed.
I'm only planning to hire graduates from Harvard University, Stanford University, or Yale University. The rest of you aren't worth my time for an interview. In other words, it's a waste of time to interview you.
I couldn't stay silent anymore. I stood up and spoke. There should have been a document screening. Obviously, our graduation universities were listed there as part of our backgrounds. It's strange to bring this up now. I don't say it should be a hiring condition. But to mention this at the final interview stage is unacceptable. We were called here because academic background isn't everything, right? The interviewer, not even trying to hide his annoyed look, said,
Academic background isn't everything. But I didn't say it doesn't matter. What to prioritize is not for you to decide. That's for me, the one doing the selecting. And I'm saying academic background matters.
I calmly responded. Having passed the document screening, our backgrounds must have been acceptable to you. And in the subsequent interviews, you checked our backgrounds, including our universities, didn't you? We passed those interviews and gathered here, right? Isn't it your personal decision to select based on academic background? Don't you consider the intentions of those who invited us or the previous interviewers? Then, the interviewer turned red with anger and shouted,
I am the HR manager. What criteria were used for the document screening doesn't concern me. In my experience, employees from top-US universities learn quickly and can do the job. Those from third-rate universities don't have the same innate abilities. If hiring was the end, it would be fine, but we have to teach you the job and get results. We won't hire underperforming burdens.
I was utterly dumbfounded by this outrageous attitude. Did this man judge everyone's character solely based on their academic background? Stubborn academic elitist might be the best way to describe him. Despite being in a creative industry, this man seemed to lack any imagination. I couldn't understand why someone like him had the power to make hiring decisions. I felt it would be a waste of time to say anything to this interviewer.
Now, raise your hand if you're a graduate from top US universities. The rest of you, get out.
The interviewer said, clapping his hands impatiently. However, not a single person in the room raised their hand. The interviewer dramatically sighed, placing his hand on his forehead as if disappointed.
What? Are you telling me there's no one useful here?
Then, the two men next to me stood up and said,
So, you're saying I'm not suitable for this company? I graduated from Heidelberg University in Germany, not one of the famous US universities you mentioned. It's a shame, as I was highly evaluated in previous interviews.
I also graduated from Cambridge in the UK, so I'll decline. I thought being from a globally recognized university would be valuable even in the US. The executive director here told me he wanted to focus more on globalization in the future and strongly encouraged me to join. But if you, who have hiring authority, insist otherwise, I can't help it.
The interviewer was stunned, but as the two men started to leave, he panicked and grabbed their arms to stop them.
Wait, the executive said that. What? Which universities did you all graduate from?
He anxiously started asking the remaining members about their universities. Then names like Sorbonne, Oxford, and other top universities worldwide began to come up.
What? What is this? No way.
The interviewer muttered in a trembling voice, quite different from before, now filled with fear and anxiety. The truth was, Most of the young people in their 20s in this room had been recruited as future executives from famous foreign universities to strengthen globalization efforts. This was not a regular group interview. It was a so-called executive candidate interview, held for those with particularly notable achievements or who were personally recommended by the executives. Although not selected based on their academic backgrounds, the remaining candidates were all quite impressive. Did the interviewer not know this? No, he probably just assumed it was a regular mid-career hiring and didn't bother to look closely at the documents. He likely thought, they must have been thoroughly screened by now. All I need to do is filter them by their university. He had probably satisfied his twisted pride by belittling and mocking candidates who couldn't fight back. He must have enjoyed intentionally being late to irritate us during this interview. But this time, things didn't go as he planned. Something unexpected happened. Everyone understood their own worth. They quickly decided to withdraw from a company that treated them so poorly during an interview. These were tough individuals who had honed their skills among the highly assertive people overseas. Unlike insecure people who might silently endure such unfair treatment, they knew their value and wouldn't sell themselves short.
It seems we don't meet your standards. Fortunately, many companies are interested in us. We just weren't meant to be here.
I don't want to waste any more time. I'll decline as well.
After being kept waiting and then treated like this, I'll pass too.
The interviewer was now in a panic. At this rate, he would lose all the young talents who had been recommended by the higher-ups. And all of this was because of his own arbitrary decision. Not only did he fail to select anyone, but he also ended up being rejected by all the candidates, which was unprecedented. Losing such talent was painful, but more importantly, his own position was now threatened. There was no doubt he would be held accountable for this as the person in charge.
No, when I said top US universities, it was just a figure of speech. Of course, top universities from overseas are welcome too. I apologize for keeping you waiting. Please stay and let us interview you. I beg you.
He suddenly started to flatter us and became very submissive. I couldn't help but smirk at his rapid change in attitude. Apart from the young people who mentioned their university names, only the man in his 40s and I remained. It seemed it was time for me to give my final statement. Well, I'll excuse myself too. As you said, I'm an old man and not a famous university graduate. But even so, I've achieved quite a bit in the advertising industry. Jeff, the senior executive director, has repeatedly tried to recruit me, asking me to contact him anytime. I thought I'd take this opportunity to start fresh after retirement and asked for this interview as a favor, but I must apologize to him. If the decision lies with the person in charge of HR, I have no choice but to comply. Could you please convey this to Jeff? The interviewer was speechless upon hearing this. He then timidly asked the man in his 40s who hadn't yet mentioned his university.
And you? Why are you here?
The interviewer was so spineless, it was pitiful. It was the first time I had ever seen someone so obsequious. The man proudly responded,
I've also won several awards in advertising. I was approached to join as an executive candidate with better terms than my current company. But like him, I'm not from a famous university. Too bad I don't meet your criteria.
Despite his words, he didn't seem too disappointed, smiling slyly. Then he turned to me, his eyes shining.
By the way, aren't you Mr. George Clooney? I've admired you for a long time. I'd love to talk with you after this.
To my delight, this man knew and appreciated my work. When I asked his name, I realized he was a well-known video creator I had seen many times. I gladly extended my hand to him. I've also been fascinated by your work. I'd love to chat with you too. The candidates present were future executive candidates who could immediately contribute to sales and skilled creators like us who could be assets in advertising production. It seemed even the young candidates had heard of our names, and they started murmuring, "Wait, from that commercial?" Despite this being the final interview for a major company, the interviewer hadn't bothered to research us and was trying to select based solely on academic background out of his own biased assumptions. Perhaps this had worked for him in the past, but that was just luck. There were probably many talented individuals who had been dismissed by him because of their academic background. What a shame. The interviewer could only let out a dry laugh at his blunder. It was clear that none of the 12 candidates intended to stay. We all left the room together. The interview, which was supposed to hire future executives, ended with everyone withdrawing. I wondered how the interviewer would explain this. After leaving the room, I decided to continue my conversation with the creator at a nearby cafe. Since both our scheduled interviews were now canceled, we had plenty of time, and we had brought our portfolios, making it convenient. We showed each other our portfolios and exchanged opinions. We spent a meaningful time exchanging new ideas and getting inspired by each other as fellow professionals at the forefront of our field. A few of the young candidates from earlier were also there. They were the ones who recognized our names and said, "Oh, from that commercial." They realized we intended to deepen our relationship and decided to join us. They listened with interest and occasionally made sharp comments that even surprised us. Then how would you change that? Or what approach would have been more effective? The conversation was more engaging than we expected. Although that ridiculous interview led to the loss of potential talent for that company, it ultimately connected us with people we wouldn't have met otherwise. We had excellent sales and administrative staff, fluent in Spanish and with international networks. As creators with experience and reputations, we had strong industry connections. The necessary talent was all here. Fortunately, with my retirement pay, I had enough funds, so I decided to start a new venture. At this age, I found myself embarking on an unexpected new adventure. In a way, I had the interviewer to thank. I called Jeff afterward to decline the offer. "I'm sorry for requesting the interview, only to decline it, but I don't want to be associated with such a despicable academic elitist. I hope you understand." When I told him everything that had happened during the interview, Jeff was shocked. He said academic background was never a hiring criterion. The candidates were indeed from prestigious universities, but that was coincidental. They were selected based on criteria like fluency in Spanish, experience living abroad, and international connections. Because the focus was on globalization, many applicants were graduates of overseas universities. The interviewer had never caused any issues before, and there had been no complaints from candidates or those who were rejected. Jeff was surprised that all the outstanding candidates had declined. He found it strange but understood after hearing my story.
Considering his behavior this time, it's hard to believe there were no complaints. We'll investigate thoroughly.
Later, Jeff informed me. The thing was that the interviewer's misconduct had been uncovered. The interviewer, a graduate of a prestigious university himself, had been bragging about it. He was good at his job and ingratiating with his superiors, which had helped him rise to the HR position, but he had arbitrarily set academic background as a hiring criterion. He hadn't documented it, but personally sorted candidates based on whether they were graduates of prestigious universities, dismissing others for not being from top U.S. universities. He made up reasons like rebellious attitude or health concerns to justify his decisions, so no one noticed. Naturally, there were complaints from those who were unfairly dismissed at the final stage with comments like, "If you're not from a top university, leave." But the interviewer had those emails deleted and phone records erased. Upon investigation, it was found that since he became the HR manager, all hires were graduates of prestigious universities. They were indeed talented and performed well, so no one thought they were hired just because of their academic background. They believed they were hired for their skills. The interviewer was praised for hiring excellent employees, so no one questioned his methods. Thus, his academic elitism went unnoticed, and those selected based on academic background continued to be hired. The hired employees were excellent, so there was no problem. But how many talented individuals were overlooked solely due to their academic background? Those who were rejected for not being from prestigious universities would see the company as practicing academic discrimination. They might tell others about it. The company's image, unknowingly damaged by the interviewer's arbitrary actions, was at risk. The interviewer was held accountable for the arbitrary selection based on educational background and was reassigned to a remote location.
The employees I hired are all excellent. What's wrong with that? I'm not wrong. I'm always right. If I had known they were from famous overseas universities, I would have hired them. Graduates from non-prestigious universities are useless. They can't even learn the job properly. They're just a burden.
He insisted vehemently, practically spitting as he spoke. However, the interviewer suddenly turned pale because of the words he had just uttered. Because the CEO, the senior executive director, and the executive director said,
"We didn't graduate from top U.S. universities, as you call them. According to you, we must be useless, incompetent burdens, right? Answer me, am I a burden to this company?"
We've achieved our positions through our accomplishments. So do you still have something to say?
Cornered by the upper management, the interviewer collapsed on the spot and, after staring blankly for a while, suddenly stood up and staggered out of the room without saying a word. He never returned to the office, and a few days later, his resignation letter arrived at the company. Jeff called me to apologize and explain the situation, and he offered me a job on the spot. I then informed him about our startup formed by the interview candidates and declined his offer. I appreciate the sentiment. Jeff smiled wryly and said, "At least that interview ended up having some meaning." Unexpectedly, our startup ended up partnering with his company.
I know you have a group of trustworthy and talented people. If you're willing, we'd love to work with you.
He said so to me. Having a partnership with a major company would significantly boost the credibility and track record of our newly formed company. When I discussed it with everyone, they agreed immediately. Thus, my second life began in an unexpected direction from that interview. Incidentally, the aforementioned interviewer tried to start a new chapter in his life too, but even with his prestigious university background, He couldn't meet the standards of other companies and is still visiting the employment agency.